Next is one of the first films from one of the most beloved directors coming from Mexico, and this film is Cronos, directed by Guillermo Del Toro. It has a Letterboxd score of 3.4 out of 5, an IMDb of 6.7 out of 10, a Rotten Tomatoes of 88% fresh, and a Metacritic of 70. As for accolades, it's on the Criterion Collection, spine number 551. I like watching the first-time feature films of directors that I like, because I like to see how they've evolved from where they were to where they are now. And Cronos is interesting in that aspect, and probably little else for me at least. It does have some of Del Toro's trademarks. It's got some beautiful special effects, macabre storytelling. It is dark, but it's also darkly humorous in some aspects as well. And I gotta say, it's an interesting twist on a vampire story. A lot of vampire stories go through the same things. They might change the edges here and there, but it's essentially the same vampire story that you're used to. And Cronos does something a little bit different, but it also feels like it's lacking some real depth to make the device interesting. I want to know some backstory. The film tells you some of the backstory of the device, but it really isn't much. And in some ways, I was kind of confused as to what the device actually does. And that is usually kind of a problem, unless the device was just to be a MacGuffin just to get the story along, which it might have been. Just the device and everything around it was a little less interesting than I was expecting, which is kind of a disappointment. I also think one of the big problems I have with this film is a mix of Hollywood and artistic sensibilities that I think are wildly off. There's a lot of films that try this, and they lean one way, and either way it can be fine. But in this film, it kind of goes all over the place. So it's got this very dark and foreboding kind of feel to the film, and yet there are things that happen in the film that seems more Hollywood-like that you would not pay attention to if it was a popcorn movie. But this film's not trying to be one, so you have to pay attention to character motivations and things like that. For example, Angel in the film, who is played by Ron Perlman. What happens at the end to his uncle gives him what he wants in the end, and yet he still feels compelled to chase Jesus in the film. And it's kind of like, why? If you paid attention to what the character is, he didn't really care about the Cronos device all that much. And then there's other issues as well that, again, the film is trying to be deeper, but while having a Hollywood kind of feel to it, and it just doesn't fit very well. So yeah, I think that Cronos is an interesting film just as a perspective as to where Del Toro started from and to where he is now. But to me, it's not that interesting of a film. It has an interesting twist to a story that has been told often, but I don't think it's interesting enough to carry the film as I think the film thinks it does. Alright, in every episode of Watch, Rate, Heart, I not only give you my opinions of the films I'm watching, but I also give you the opinions of the Letterboxd community. This first review is a negative one. It's from Corey Haynes. Corey gives it 2 stars out of 5, and Corey says, slow, boring, unsettling, gothic, undercooked, ambitious, disappointing, unscary, dark, simple, over the top, dumb, ineffective, overrated, dull, and unsatisfying. There could be a few more words you could use there, Corey, but okay, I see where you're coming from. Okay story, mid-acting, and cool to look at sometimes vampire fairy tale that offers a unique take that but ultimately feels like a movie made for TV slog. I wouldn't call it a slog, honestly. And I think calling it made for TV is kind of unfair too. It definitely looks interesting in certain parts, but I do agree with a lot of what he is saying. I don't call it slow or boring either. It is definitely undercooked. I would definitely say that. It just feels like there's a lot of detail missing that is just completely unsatisfying for the story. So I'll give Corey that at least. This next review is from Loren. Loren gives it 3 stars out of 5, and Loren says, really interesting to watch Guillermo Del Toro's first feature film, and I'm glad Hooptober pushed me to explore more of his filmography. I don't know what Hooptober is, but okay, that's interesting. You can already see the seeds of his signature style here. Dark, imaginative, and beautifully eerie. That is true. The seeds of what he does is definitely in this film. It's an average watch and a good glimpse into where his storytelling all began. Yeah, and I think that's the best way to look at this film. If you are very interested in Del Toro and how he started, this is probably the best reason to watch Cronos. And finally, this last review is from Joshua Seed M. Joshua gives it 3.5 stars out of 5, and Joshua says, what does the beetle really do? You know, and that's kind of the problem I had in the end of the film. I was watching this film, I was interested in what this device was all about, what it does and everything, and even afterwards, I'm still not sure. At first, I was like, oh, it turns people into vampires? Okay, interesting. I won't spoil what happens, but at the end of the film, another person wants the device, and apparently it also helps you live as well? Like, I'm not sure, really. If it's a vampirism beetle, okay, that's cool, I guess, but it's really not enough to actually make much of a movie out of it. And what was the point of showing the gears and the creature that's inside of it and everything? Like, there's so much about the beetle that I do not understand. On one hand, I think someone would be like, well, the mystery is what makes it good. But on the other hand, you need a little bit to give a little hints as to what it is. And if I'm grasping at straws trying to figure out, like Joshua, what does this do, really? I think it's kind of a failure of showcasing that device and item that's supposed to make the story interesting, but that's just my opinion on that. So in review, this showcases some of Del Toro's trademarks in filmmaking. I also like some of its dark humor, and it's an interesting twist on the vampire story, but it lacks real depth to make the device itself interesting, and I think the mix of Hollywood and artistic sensibilities are just wildly off. This is probably one of the few Del Toro films I don't like. I'm going to give this 2 stars out of 5. I would not say I was bored by the film. I wouldn't say that I was like struggling through it, but there were some definite problems, and I think overall it was just an ineffective film. But again, like I said with some of the reviews, I think the best reason to watch this film is if you're interested in Del Toro and where he started from. If that's why you're interested, give this movie a shot. If you could care less, don't bother with it. It's not that good. So overall, 2 stars out of 5 for me for Cronos. If you liked any of the reviewers I've highlighted in this episode, you can check out the description for a link to their Letterboxd profile. Be sure to give them a follow and let them know that Brad from Watch Rate Heart sent you. You can follow me on Letterboxd and X at Watch Rate Heart. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed it and share with your friends. I'm Brad from Watch Rate Heart. Thank you for watching, and remember, we all watch and rate movies, but you give them the heart that makes them live forever.